welcome everyone. We are giving you some insight today. In the midst of COVID-19, we know that there isn't a person on this planet that's not affected by what we're seeing in this global pandemic. There's so many layers to the conversation. There's so much information that everyone is desiring because this hasn't been seen in our living experience on the globe. So to the extent that information can be shared and that sound advice and resources are available, it's our desire to be a part of those solutions. We know everyone's trying to figure out so much at the same time while dealing with real life situations. Many of us have lost our loved ones. We've watched other people fight through COVID, still fighting through, and the threat has not disappeared. So in the midst of everything that's going on, there's a need for information on the legal system. And I'm excited to have two experts joining us today as they are going to be moving through some just general information about how to deal with the law in the midst of this new COVID-19 reality. And then we'll be taking questions from you about some of the issues that you might be facing at this time. So I'm going to start with introducing a dear friend and client, publisher for his book, Cardiac Arrest, which I think he has handy, the tactical guide on how to handle unlawful police stops. Mr. Royce Russell is with us today. So Royce, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us, and yes, we have it in the Spanish version too. We've been busy working to answer part of the need in our community. So Mr. Russell, over to you.
First of all, I want to thank all our first-time listeners and viewers. The show will be exciting and informative, not only from a legal perspective, but from a cultural perspective. And I want to thank Destiny Design for laying the platform to have Speaking Legally, where culture and legal issues come together for two minds to discuss how to navigate the judicial system and the court system in general. So just a little bit about myself for those who are first-time listeners and first-time viewers. My name is Royce Russell, a product of the Bronx, attorney by profession, been practicing for over 20 odd years, closer to 25, if not 30 years, practicing in the area of civil rights, forced arrest, police brutality, criminal defense, both on the federal and state level, as well as immigration, and doing a variety of things to help our community, whether it's small business transactions, whether it's trademarks, whether it is copyright issues, but basically educating the community and providing a service so our community does not have to go too far to seek the services that they are in need. And I'm so glad to be here today with my partner, office mate, comrade, someone that I share many of the moments with and many of the question over legal issues on how to attack it, not only from a diplomatic standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, because sometimes the Bronx can get the best of me, is Ed Pichardo. So Ed, why don't you say a couple of words?
Well, my name is Ed Pichardo. I feel privileged to be here today with Dr. Stacy Grant and my colleague and office mate, Royce Russell. You know, I want to congratulate him, as I've had many times, on his book. I recommend, it's good reading. You know, just want to be able to share some information from the community, with the community. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I'm a longtime labor attorney, so I specialize in criminal defense, labor, in particular issues facing labor union members. I also do some general civil work. I have a website, www.lawofficeofedwardpichardo.com, if you want to try to reach me or get a better picture of who I am and my experience. So, you know, I'll stop there and, you know, we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for just giving some insight on who you are, and definitely people can connect with you on social media, and we'll make sure that we repost those handles so that you can have deeper conversations with two of these experts in the legal field. So let's get into just talking about the reality. The reality is we're being told that there are consequences for not complying with the behavior of social distancing and gatherings, and Matilda's Law, for those in the state of New York, is something that the governor has been very explicit about, and for the right reasons, trying to protect New Yorkers and also being a leader in the country in what it is that we're doing to mitigate the damage that COVID-19 is creating all over. And particularly in communities of color, we know that the stats are now coming out on how much this is affecting us. But when you get stopped in this environment and you do receive a summons, how is this whole process working? I mean, these fines are pretty high, and if they're given out in communities that already have economic disadvantage, what do we need to know about receiving a fine in this time? How does the court system work when courts are closed? And what does this mean for someone having a record or not having a record? So I'll jump over to you, Ed, with just some initial information that people should be aware of when you talk about the fines that you could possibly receive for not complying with the sheltering in laws.
Well, when the governor first came out with his executive order, most of these fines were between $250 and $500. And then as I guess the authorities started observing many individuals kind of ignoring these, these orders, recently, the governor announced that the social distancing fine was going to be pushed up to a maximum of $1,000. And actually, effective April 1st, and I believe this was passed during the passage of the budget, there was an amendment to the public health law, in particular section 12-B sub 2, that makes the violation of an order that's promulgated by the local board of health or health officer to an unclassified misdemeanor of a year and a $2,000 maximum fine. I recently saw a posting by an attorney who was being interviewed that municipality upstate was looking to issue a warning first and then look at the possible misdemeanor after. So, those are things that, folks have to keep in mind, especially in our community when it comes to the observation of these orders that are being put out. And actually, today, there was an announcement that people are going to be required to wear face masks in most public areas, or face violation and or fines. That's supposed to not go into effect for another 3 days, but that's something for folks to really look out for.
Wow. So wait, you said a lot before Royce jumps in with his take on what's happening. So one, the fines went from 250, 300, maybe 500, now going up to 1,000. There's an additional fine medically, I think you said, that can go up to $2,000?
Well, what's happening is that, first of all, these promulgations regarding the social distancing, wearing a face mask, and so forth are apparently coming out of the Department of Health, the Board of Health, local health officers. So that implicates the public health law. And so when you don't follow the public health law, there are consequences within that particular section that I talk about, that I just mentioned, rather. And, under certain conditions, you could possibly look at beyond, the fine, possible imprisonment. So, things are getting really serious.
That's very serious. And the fact that in a couple of days, if you're not wearing a face mask or face covering, then that's another layer to it. And the reason why I wanted to drill down a little bit on your response is, as I do very minimal travel to grocery or, taking care of something at the post office, I still see people that are not adhering to what we've been told. And I know that these are folks living in places and spaces that $1,000 for a fine is not something that they can necessarily take out of their pocket. So that's interesting and something for everybody to take away. But Royce, you have your thoughts on this subject matter, as well as these summons and issues for fines create these other opportunities now for people who are already in disenfranchised situations to have multiple challenges.
Well, in response to what Ed is saying, and just on the air of making sure that folks understand where we're coming from a legal and from a cultural perspective, is that you need to pay attention to the laws and you need to abide by the laws. safety is first. There's no discrimination. There is no classification. There's no classism when it comes down to this virus. However, when you look at and you take a deeper dive into some of the laws that are being drafted and the catalyst and the motivation and even the punitive aspect of the laws, it is driven somewhat on a classist basis. When you first started to see the social distancing being publicized and being really, really mandated by the police, you saw folks that had the economic means disobey. Just blatantly, I'm still going to run in Central Park. I'm still going to go to the restaurant or the bar I want to go to. I'm still going to talk to the people and live my life the way I want to live my life. And I think that's where Ed has accurately stated that, you know, certain health laws and certain fines related to health issues started to play a factor where you start to see the fines gradually increase. That doesn't mean that my fellow comrades and my people in Harlem or in the Bronx were not or were paying attention and adhering to the social distancing rules and regulations. I can tell you I've been in the city numerous times to pick up mail and just seen a total disregard for that. And that's an issue. And that's a problem because, not to say everyone can afford it, but why would you want to give the criminal justice system or any New York City agency or any governmental agency $200, $300, $500, or $1,000 fine? I like the spirit in which Ed has mentioned that some counties and some states have issued a warning, and then after they issue a warning, then they issue a fine. I can understand why New York may not be able to do that just because of kind of keeping a base as to whether or not you received the warning before, as opposed to me or as a police officer issuing a fine directly. But we need to pay attention and adhere to that because remember, we were marching, at least I was, and I know Ed was, marching for certain decriminalization of certain laws that, such as, you know, whether or not jumping the turnstile, not paying your fare, should be a misdemeanor. It should haunt you for the rest of your life when you go to college and you apply for jobs. Whether or not having marijuana in the public, should that be criminalized and should that haunt you for the rest of your life? So I don't want people in our community, whether it's the Latino community, for which Ed can speak for, and the African-American community, for which I and Ed can speak for, and you represent, to have it twisted. It shouldn't be twisted. You need to abide by the law. I can tell you, I received at least 2 or 3 phone calls from folks saying that they want to file lawsuits for false arrest, for excessive force. And I asked them, well, tell me the facts of what was going on. Well, it was about 10 o'clock, and well, once I heard the time, it was 10 o'clock p.m., and well, then right then I have to pause on that type of case, because we know that there's an 8 o'clock curfew. We know that in some places you're not supposed to be out. So what are you doing out at 10 o'clock anywhere doing anything? Mm-hmm. And if a police officer approaches you and say, you need to go home, there is no discussion in this time. There's only reaction, and that is going home. You can't be going anyplace because most establishments are closed. Unless you're walking to the ER or to the hospital, you need to listen. So then I'll take it a step further to really answer your question, is that economically, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. Once again, whether you have it or don't have it, do you really want to have to come to court, miss a day from work, potentially forget about that you was issued this summons, and then have a warrant out for your arrest? Wow. And then when you're driving with your family and a warrant and you get stopped by the police and they say you have a warrant, and now you're arguing with the police officer because you say, I don't have any warrant. I don't know what you're talking about. You're stopping me for some other reason. And you fail to realize that, oh, back when COVID was around, you received that summons, but you disregarded it. And that's where the fine comes. And that's where the warrant comes from. And that's where the stop comes from. And that's where your agitation comes from.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important right there, to just pause on obeying the rules. I know everyone deals with how to abide by the rules of authority, but that's how we keep a civil nation. No matter where you are, there are rules. And if you break the rules, there are consequences. And I know that there was even more challenge around COVID-19 and compliance with our younger people, not necessarily just the millennials, but those who are younger. I guess that's what Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, I can't keep up because clearly I'm not in any one of those age ranges. But what would you say to our young people who some of them are still struggling with sheltering in, curfews, abiding by rules? Parents are frustrated because they can't keep their kids indoors. They don't know what to do. And then they end up in a situation where they're calling one of you because they've been falsely or feel that they've been falsely arrested. What would you just say to a younger person who might be watching, and or what would you say to the parents who are struggling to help their children comply with this new normal that we're in for this COVID-19 duration?
Well, I think your question really cuts across class lines, right? And the reason why I say that is because depending upon your socioeconomic status, you may live in an area that is less conducive to managing the social distance as opposed to someone that lives in an area which is more conducive. So if you live in the suburbs, and let's just say you have a kid that is home from school, from college, or is now being home taught, there is protocols that you can easily manage. If somebody comes over to the house, then you need to be 6 feet apart. And maybe there's space to have that, right? You're not on a street corner that is congested. You're not on a street or a block where there's more or other people there that prevents you from really staying 6 feet away from anyone. So I think that is a class issue that helps some and hurts others, because with certain classes, such as the middle and the upper middle class and the richer class, think that, you know, I can still do what I want. Police are not going to bother me. I can go over someone's house, be in their backyard, and we can still do what we do because no one's coming in the backyard. Hence, putting themselves in jeopardy of sickness. That's one scenario. The other scenario is those that live in a more urban environment, and we could talk about whether that's middle class to lower class or working class, where you may live in New York City housing, or you may live in Newark, and you may live in public housing where the ability to stay distant is slim to none, because you have multiple units on one floor. You have people, at least when I grew up in the Bronx, you had what they call an incinerator. You had to take your garbage out of your house. You had to walk to what they call an incinerator. You had to pull it open. You had to put your garbage and you had to close it. And you hope you made it back to your apartment before somebody stuck you up. That was the time and place that I grew up, right? Now, maybe you're not getting stuck up in this day and age, but you still got to make that walk. The incinerator still exists. And therefore, you could be in contact with someone where there is no law enforcement. So it's really a self-law abiding, self-regulating type of mentality that you have to have. And once again, since you talk about parents struggling with or dealing with, you know, parenting plays a large role in how kids respond, whether it's young kids, 10 or younger, or 15 and older. Once again, I'll just draw on my own history. You couldn't have anybody in the household unless my parents approved it. It just wasn't going down like that. And for those who have control of their household, that type of discipline needs to be paid forward. No one's coming in the house because, yeah, you may think it's okay, the person that wants to invite the individual in, but you're exposing others to sickness, and that shouldn't happen. But I do understand that is quite difficult, because when you press for that elevator button and you live on the 21st floor and you want to go downstairs and get some fresh air, you better believe that elevator is stopping on a variety of floors before it hits that main floor, before you can go outside and get that fresh air. And that's the reality.
I mean, for me, I currently live in an apartment building that has 6 floors, and the sign on the elevator is 2 at a time with respect to social distancing. So, you know, I mean, even in that context, because each one of these floors here in this building has, say, 7 apartments. So luckily, you know, it's a pretty quiet building, and I haven't really encountered any situations in the last couple of weeks where I've had to ride the elevator with more than one person, or even somebody that wasn't covered like I normally am. But I think with respect to the message to young people and just people in our community overall, the message is this is serious. This is about death. You know, this virus is disproportionately affecting Black and Latino communities. You know, the borough of the Bronx is disproportionately getting hit, given its size of its population. Brooklyn too, Queens also, you know, getting hit really hard. Just today, they said there were 752 more deaths overnight. So, you know, that speaks to it. And like you said, Royce, if you don't care about yourself, at least care about the people that you live with. I mean, at the end of the day, this is exposing some of the historic, savage inequalities that have been afflicting our community for years. Housing discrimination. You know, there was a time when I was growing up, a particular time in my life where 5 of us were living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a tenement. You know, I can just imagine if we were going through COVID back then. I think it was back in 1982 when I was going through this, 84, and what it would have been like, and trying to keep a social distance. I mean, it's definitely a class dynamic there. Some of us have backyards, a lot of us don't, you know. Some of us have these multi-level homes where we can go isolate ourselves somewhere and not have contact with other family members. Others don't have that luxury. I can understand why some of the young men in our community are standing outside on the street, because there's something going on in at home that they're trying to get away from. But what I would say is that even with all of that, you know, if you just observe kind of that minimum level of social distancing, wearing some face covering, maybe even taking the extra precaution of wearing some gloves, and then, you know, maybe we can all get through this without having to endure a fine or an arrest or being in violation of the law, and at the same time protecting the vulnerable people in our community, because a lot of people in our community suffer from diabetes, high blood pressure, other health conditions that make us particularly vulnerable. A lot of us live with older folks in our homes. You got many homes in communities of color where you have 3 generations living in the same house. You have that young person, their parent, and then the grandparent too. You know, and not to mention, you might have an infant in that home who's particularly vulnerable. You know, you also got this dynamic, I don't know. You know, you also got this dynamic with some of our members of our community that are particularly attached to the church are in some ways kind of using religion to justify not observing some of these, you know, social distancing orders. And, you know, that's kind of unfortunate. And maybe that's the topic for another program. But, you know, I've had to have a strong conversation with one of my own relatives about that.
And
understanding that dynamic that I'm sorry, Stacey, but understanding that dynamic that you just spoke of, Ed, when you have multiple generations within a household, and even infants and grandkids and great-great-grandkids, speaks to the overall classism and racism of having some of the nicer developments more like prisons, right? And so as we see COVID take over in society, we see the same in prisons, where people are on top of one another. And if one person in one unit has COVID, then it is for sure that everyone in that unit is going to have COVID. And are people taking their sanitary, you know, or taking any type of precautions to make sure that they wipe down something like this, the incinerator? Make sure that they, you know, when they press a button, they clean their hands when they press for the elevator. Or are they wearing gloves when they do these things? And how many gloves can you have in a household when you have more than 5 people or 6 people? And, you know, there's just an abundance of social ills or social situations that the law, the black letter of the law, does not take in consideration. And so, once again, I want to have our listeners understand that this is the platform where you're going to see and you're going to hear us speak the legal and speak the cultural and really try to problem solve from a distance, or at least educate from a distance on how to manage these situations. I gather that in the future, when COVID is over, that a lot of the fines that you see now will be dismissed. But right now, we're in phase one. And phase one is that you're not paying attention to the law. And so therefore, there need to be some consequences. Later on, after life is returned to some normalcy or some level of being normal, will the 55-year-old man or the 16-year-old boy who might be a scholar student or not, will the judge enforce a fine on that individual now when that is the only thing that they have on their criminal docket? That's the only thing that they have that put them in contact with the criminal justice system? I hope not. I hope we can see that that was a time and space that, yes, we need to do what we need to do, but now we need not take it any further.
Well,
but
just
we'll see. Time will tell.
It will.
Just to follow up, so I would imagine, Royce, that, like Royce said, that these fines are going to get dismissed. The important thing for the community is that if you do get this fine, really try your best to respond to it. Show up in court or ask for a hearing for it. Try to get that, dismissed. Don't let it get to the point where it turns into a warrant. Yeah, you may get the desk appearance ticket, hopefully, if you don't have some other pending matter that comes up during the background check that the officer does when you do experience a stop and that warrant comes up. But, try not to let it get to that point. Try not to let it get to the point where it turns into some sort of default judgment where you have a harder time getting that dismissed or that fine reduced in the amount. And also I just wanted to mention one more thing. I was doing some reading, and I even saw a mention of possible reckless endangerment charges in some instances, depending on, the level of discretion that's used and the circumstances and the facts by the particular officer that you encounter. And, young people have to be, keep that in mind too, because we're dealing with something that in most people's minds is talking about lives and danger and so forth. And I doubt that I would imagine that the circumstances of that type of charge coming into place will be very rare. But, people have to understand that, when you have that encounter with that officer, God knows who you're dealing with, which is a lot of what Royce discusses in his book.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think those are.
And I'm
Go ahead,
I'm
Roy.
sorry, Stacey. No. It's important. It's important to just take that thought and go even further, right? And so here's an example of what Ed is talking about. There used to be a time where people were abusing MTA employees. That wasn't a crime. It's just something that just would happen. And the union and the city and the mayor and the DA's office got tired of that. And so what happened is that now they made it a crime. They made it a felony if you assault any transit worker, conductor, bus driver, right? And so how do we define assault? Assault can be defined physical injury, right? Depending upon the nature of the injury can determine whether it's assault in the first degree, third degree, second degree, broken jaw, broken hand, something of that nature. So now let's fast forward. So now we have this disease. And so now a police officer is telling you to get off the block. You could have just came downstairs, have nothing to do with nothing. But he happens to be in that area, in that place, in that time. And you could not be practicing social distancing because you intentionally planned it that way, but you just came out the building and somebody just happens to be 4 feet away from you. You don't even know that person. You just kind of going to go about your day. But they see that and they stop you. And there is an exchange. And I would like to think that we're not stupid enough, when I say we, Black, brown, folks of color are not stupid enough to say something like, I have COVID, I hope you get it, if they're in some type of high level hostile scenario with a police officer. But if that happens, that rises a little bit above just getting a ticket. And if it doesn't now, it will, because that will be described as some type of menacing, as you said, and some type of reckless endangerment, some type of assault, something of that nature will definitely lead to criminalization. Now, if you're in that scenario and you are stopped, you need to be aware that that can be out there. And if you have an unscrupulous police officer who wants to change the fact scenario to fit that, you need to be aware of that. It is not just a fine and go. It could be. It could be just a heavy fine and go. It could be that things escalate and you decide that you want to pull down your mask to articulate yourself or enforce your First Amendment freedom of speech type of right, and that turns into a crime. Just like that.
And it's not far-fetched.
I think paying attention. Oh, yeah.
You said there was an example, Ed?
Yeah, I recall reading recently an article where a gentleman was being arrested and actually said, I have COVID, and I actually spit at the officer, from my recollection. You know, so, you know, these are things that are being contemplated, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's more that will be discussed. You know, Speaking Legally, the two of you are coming together to talk about real life issues that are happening legally and culturally around how we can, as a community, empower ourselves to make good choices and decisions. And if we get into situations that require legal attention, that we have experts who can be the answers to those problems. So as we wrap up our first installment of the show today, I want both of you to just share how people can contact you in your offices. Clearly, everyone is virtually working, but there's no distance in a telephone consultation or an emergency call for two people who deal in civil, criminal, and immigration issues, which is another part of what we'll discuss on these shows. But we thank you for tuning in. Jamar, Shari, actually two attorneys have joined in. They're in different disciplines, but we appreciate all of you for tuning in to this part of the conversation with COVID-19. There's so many layers that we're dealing with, but being aware of what's happening with law enforcement all across this country and clearly the globe, things are shifting. It's happening in real time. Empower yourself with the right information and make a good choice not to even be in the opportunity for an officer to stop you, right? We don't even want you to have to deal with the criminal justice system on top of everything else that we're dealing with COVID. But if you or a family member are in that scenario, you now have two experts that you can contact to walk you through the process and help to navigate your quest for justice. So I'll start with you, Ed. Let them know your contact information.
Okay. I can be reached at EDP at law office of Edward Pichardo.com. That's P-I-C-H-A-R, D as in Dan, O as in Oscar. Or I also have a website, www.lawofficeofedwardpichardo.com. And a number I can be reached at as well is 718-514-9099. That's 718-514-9099.
Thank you, Ed and Royce.
Well, first, let me just say that, you know, in the book Cardiac Arrest, we talk about how it's important to have an attorney, retain an attorney. Nothing speaks more volume than this day and age right now, that you have an attorney that you have retained. And retained does not mean that you give money. It means that you have a relationship with, you have a telephone number to, if a friend of a friend has a relationship with. Because if your process and if you're arrested, and we'll have this discussion on another segment of Speaking Legally, if your process and if you're arrested, then that will not be the time to try to find out who can come and defend you, because the world is different when it comes down to that. It is not the same. So speaking with that voice and understanding that you need to have that name on the refrigerator, you need to have that name in your wallet, you need to have the name in the back of whatever card you keep or in the recesses of your mind, You can first look me up at www.roycerussellesq.com so you can find out more about me and you can feel comfortable in the advice that we're giving and what we stand for. You can always research the book at cardiac arrest, booklaunch.net or .com. You can go to any of those sites. I can
Cardiac
be reached
arrest.
at 718.
I just want to make sure you get the website right because somebody might need the book. Cardiacarrestbook.net.
That's right.
And give your number.
Cardiacarrestbook.net. And you can also reach me at 718-785-8890. That's 718-785-8890. And my email is rsquare, RSQUAREESQ @gmail. Hope to hear from you, and hopefully it's giving advice rather than defending.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for sharing this platform and opening up a dialogue where people can get information on the legal aspect, not just of COVID-19, but the other areas that you all specialize in on Speaking Legally. So thank you all for tuning in. Share this if you feel that it can be a blessing to somebody who needs this content or needs this information. And look out for our next installment of Speaking Legally with attorneys Royce Russell and Edward Pichardo. Take care, everyone. Shelter in, stay safe, and be well. Bye for now.